Hello, and welcome back to Human Behavior Lab. I'm New York, your observer and analyst. Today, we're going to explore something that touches every corner of human society, the psychology of transaction.
Hi everyone, I'm Juan. And New York, when you say transaction, I immediately think of buying things at a store. But I have a feeling you mean something deeper than that, right?
Indeed. Today we'll examine how humans have extended the logic of economic exchange into areas that were never meant to be transactional: presidential pardons, political influence, and even international relations. We'll analyze several recent news stories through the lens of behavioral psychology.
That sounds, honestly, a bit heavy. But I think a lot of us feel like something has changed in how people relate to each other these days. Like everything comes with a price tag attached.
Let's begin with a fascinating case study from The New Yorker, titled Donald Trump's Pardon Economy. This article examines how the presidential pardon power, originally designed as an instrument of mercy and justice, has increasingly become perceived through a transactional lens.
Wait, I thought pardons were just the president forgiving someone? Like showing mercy?
That was the original constitutional intent. However, the article describes what psychologists call commodification, the process of transforming something non-economic into something that can be bought, sold, or traded. When pardons are perceived as rewards for loyalty or silence, the fundamental nature of the act changes.
That makes me uncomfortable. But isn't that just how politics works? You scratch my back, I scratch yours?
You've identified what behavioral economists call reciprocity bias, the deeply ingrained human tendency to expect returns for favors given. This is evolutionarily adaptive in small communities, but becomes problematic when applied to institutional power. The danger is that once people perceive a system as transactional, they adjust their behavior accordingly.
So if I think pardons are for sale, I might be more likely to do something illegal if I believe I can get pardoned later?
Precisely. This relates to what psychologists call moral licensing, the phenomenon where people feel entitled to behave unethically because they've accumulated credit through previous actions or associations. When institutions are perceived as transactional, it creates what researchers call institutional cynicism.
Institutional cynicism. That's a heavy phrase. Is that why so many people don't trust the government anymore?
It's a significant factor. When citizens perceive that justice itself has become a commodity, it triggers what sociologists call norm erosion, the gradual breakdown of shared expectations about how institutions should function. The article suggests that the perception of transactional pardons may have lasting effects on public trust.
But here's what I don't get. People have always traded favors. Isn't this just human nature?
An excellent question. There's an important distinction between personal reciprocity and institutional capture. In small groups, reciprocity builds trust. But in institutions, when personal loyalty overrides public duty, we see what political scientists call principal-agent problems, where the agent serves their own interests rather than those they're supposed to represent.
So it's not that trading favors is wrong. It's about where and how we do it.
Exactly. Context matters enormously. The same behavior that strengthens family bonds can corrupt national institutions. This is what we call domain specificity in moral psychology. Our moral intuitions evolve for specific contexts, and applying them inappropriately can cause systemic dysfunction.
That makes me wonder, how do people justify this to themselves? Like, do they know they're doing something wrong?
This leads us naturally to our second topic. The Tennessee Lookout published an investigation titled Cash for Clout Database: Who's Funding Tennessee's Politics? This piece exposes the visible infrastructure of transactional politics, how money flows into political systems and what donors receive in return.
Okay, but campaign donations are legal, right? People are allowed to support politicians they agree with.
Legally, yes. But psychologically, we need to examine what researchers call implicit reciprocity. When a corporation donates to a politician, neither party may explicitly say this money is for this vote, but both understand the expectation. This creates what anthropologists call a gift economy, where gifts create obligations without explicit contracts.
So it's like, everyone knows what's happening, but nobody says it out loud?
Precisely. This relates to what sociologists call pluralistic ignorance, a situation where most people in a group privately reject a norm but incorrectly assume everyone else accepts it. Many politicians and donors may privately feel uncomfortable with transactional politics but believe it's just how things work.
That's actually kind of sad. Like everyone's trapped in a system nobody really wants.
Your reaction reflects what psychologists call system justification theory, the observation that people often rationalize and defend the status quo, even when it harms them, because the alternative feels too uncertain or difficult to achieve. But importantly, this same research shows that awareness is the first step toward change.
The article mentions a database. So they're making this information public? Does that help?
Transparency is a powerful psychological intervention. Research on sunlight effects shows that when people know their actions are visible, they behave more ethically. The Cash for Clout database applies what behavioral scientists call an accountability nudge, making the implicit explicit forces people to confront the reality of transactional politics.
But does it actually change behavior? Like, do politicians stop taking money?
The evidence is mixed. Transparency alone doesn't eliminate transactional behavior, but it shifts what we call the social acceptability threshold. Behaviors that were once normalized become stigmatized. This is how social change often happens, not through immediate transformation, but through gradual shifts in what's considered acceptable.
So maybe our job as citizens is just to keep paying attention?
That's a profound insight. What you're describing relates to civic attention theory, the idea that democratic institutions function better when citizens actively observe and discuss political processes. Your attention is itself a resource that shapes behavior. Now let's examine how transactional thinking operates at the international level. The New York Times reports that the Iran war is starting to expose cracks in China's economy. This story reveals how economic interdependence creates hidden vulnerabilities.
Wait, what does war in Iran have to do with China's economy? That seems really disconnected.
On the surface, yes. But consider what economists call supply chain dependency. China built economic relationships with Iran based on mutual benefit, oil in exchange for goods and infrastructure. This is transactional thinking applied to international relations. The assumption was that economic interdependence would create stability.
So they thought, we trade with them, they trade with us, everyone's happy and nobody fights?
Essentially. This reflects what political scientists call commercial peace theory, the hypothesis that nations deeply connected through trade are less likely to go to war. However, the current situation reveals what we might call the vulnerability paradox. The same connections that create stability also create dependencies that can become liabilities.
So when conflict happens, it's not just about the countries fighting, it affects everyone connected to them?
Exactly. This is what systems theorists call coupling risk. When systems are tightly coupled, meaning they depend heavily on each other, problems in one area cascade rapidly to others. China's investment in Iran wasn't wrong, but it demonstrates what behavioral economists call optimism bias, the tendency to underestimate risks in familiar situations.
But isn't this just how the global economy works? Everyone's connected to everyone?
True, but the degree and nature of connections matters. This relates to what psychologists call diversification of risk. Nations, like individuals, can become overconfident in relationships that seem beneficial. The article suggests China may need to reconsider the structure of its economic dependencies.
This is making me think about my own life. Like, am I too dependent on certain things?
That's a valuable reflection. The same psychological patterns operate at personal, institutional, and international levels. What cognitive therapists call dependency awareness, recognizing where we've placed our dependencies and whether those are healthy, is a useful exercise for everyone.
Is there also a connection to housing? I noticed there's an article about housing finance reform.
Indeed. The Brookings article Reform the Federal Home Loan Banks to Finance the Housing America Needs touches on similar themes. It examines how financial institutions designed for public benefit can drift from their original purpose. This is what institutional economists call mission drift, when organizations gradually shift away from their founding goals.
So even banks meant to help people can stop helping people?
This brings us to our final topic, which offers a different perspective. The National Academies published an article titled Science, Society, and Culture, Brandon Ogbunu's Case for a More Creative Scientific Enterprise. This piece argues against purely transactional approaches to knowledge creation.
Wait, science can be transactional too? I thought scientists were just searching for truth.
Ideally, perhaps. But modern science operates under what sociologists call publish or perish culture, a highly transactional system where researchers trade publications for career advancement. Dr. Ogbunu argues this creates what we might call innovation stagnation. Scientists pursue safe, predictable research rather than creative, risky ideas.
So instead of asking what's the most important question, they ask what will get published?
Precisely. This reflects what organizational psychologists call goal displacement, when measurable indicators become more important than the actual mission. Publications were meant to measure scientific contribution, now they've become the goal itself. Dr. Ogbunu advocates for creative science, approaches that integrate diverse perspectives and embrace uncertainty.
But how do you encourage creativity? It's not like you can just tell people, be creative.
You've identified a key insight from motivation research. What psychologists call intrinsic motivation, doing something because you find it inherently meaningful, cannot be forced through transactional rewards. In fact, research shows that adding external rewards can sometimes decrease intrinsic motivation, a phenomenon called the overjustification effect.
So if we make everything about rewards and transactions, we actually kill the creativity we're trying to encourage?
That appears to be a significant risk. Dr. Ogbunu's argument connects to what we've been discussing throughout this episode. When we apply transactional thinking to domains that require intrinsic motivation, science, art, education, even justice, we may undermine the very qualities we value.
Is there a way to balance this? Like, we still need some transactions, right? Scientists need to get paid.
Of course. The key is what organizational theorists call alignment, ensuring that reward structures support rather than undermine core missions. This might mean evaluating scientists based on long-term impact rather than publication counts, or designing political systems that reward public service rather than fundraising ability. Let's synthesize what we've explored today. From presidential pardons to campaign finance, from international economics to scientific research, we see a common pattern: the spread of transactional thinking into domains where it may not belong.
And this isn't about blaming anyone, right? It's more like understanding why we fall into this pattern.
Exactly. Transactional thinking is deeply human. It served our ancestors well in small communities. The challenge is that our institutions have grown faster than our intuitive psychology. We're applying ancient mental software to modern social hardware.
So what can we actually do? Like, as regular people watching this?
Awareness is the foundation. When you recognize transactional patterns, you can choose whether to participate in them. You can ask, is this relationship meant to be transactional? What do I lose by treating it that way? You can support institutions and leaders who demonstrate non-transactional values.
I think I get it. It's not that transactions are bad. It's that not everything should be a transaction. Some things are meant to be just what they are.
Beautifully expressed. Justice is meant to be just. Science is meant to seek truth. Relationships are meant to connect us. When we remember the intrinsic purpose of things, we can resist the gravitational pull of transactional thinking. Thank you for exploring these ideas with us today, Juan.
Thank you, New York. This was really eye-opening. And to everyone watching, maybe this week, notice when you're making something transactional that doesn't need to be. I know I will.
Until next time, keep observing the fascinating structures of human behavior. This is New York, signing off from the Human Behavior Lab.